Hey folks, today we're going to take a look at a game that is currently seeking funding on Kickstarter. That game is called Legacy's Allure, and it's from the publisher Plutonian Shore Games. Now, if you like what you see throughout the rest of this preview video, what I'm going to do is encourage you to go to the official Kickstarter campaign project and find out more information than I could possibly tell you here. To do that, I'm going to put a link in the top corner of your screen, as well as down in the description section right underneath this video. Go there, find out more information, and hopefully just consider backing the project. Now, what Legacy's Allure is a two-player asymmetrical war game. You and the other players take control of these fantasy kingdoms who are engaged in a bitter conflict over territory and revenge and love and all of these different things, depending on which kingdom you're playing as. And what you're trying to do is actually not just wipe out the enemy. What you're trying to do is control the center point of the map, the center hex. One player will be designated as the first player, who will actually take their turn first at the start of the game. The other player is designated the second player, and if that first player can maintain control, can have control of that center hex at the end of the 7th round, they win. If they can't, they lose. That's how the game works. But of course, it is a bit more complicated than that. As you're going to see in the preview section here, there are plenty of different units that you can put out onto the field, each with their own abilities and stats. There are special ability cards. There are special heroes that each kingdom has that use those ability cards and use special equipment as well. And it is a game that could be expanded infinitely, as we'll discuss in the last section of this video. So without further ado, let's go ahead and take a look at it. Then we're going to come back and and discuss it further. And do bear in mind that this is a prototype copy of the game, so the final version of the game may change, and that is why you should go to the Kickstarter page to find out more information as the project progresses. Let's take a look. Legacy's Allure is a competitive, asymmetrical strategy war game for 2 players. Each player fields an army of fantasy troops represented by cards on a hex-based map. The player who is designated the first player at the start of the game has one goal: occupy the center hex of the map with one of their units at the end of the 7th and final round of the game. If they do that, they win. Otherwise, the second player is the winner. Begin the setup of the game by laying out the hex-based map representing the battlefield. In the center, yellow-bordered hex, place a white die turned to 1. This represents a special shield bonus that a unit occupying the hex will receive while in it. When a unit takes damage there the first time, 1 damage will be prevented and the shield will be removed. In fact, there are multiple colors of dice used as markers in the game, and you should make a stock of them within reach of both players. White dice are used for shields, blue dice for mana, red dice for damage, and yellow and black dice for any other purpose, like rolling to determine first player. Speaking of that should be your next step. Both players will roll to determine who is first and who is second, and will take an indicator card flipped to the appropriate side to remind them of this. You can also just decide mutually who is going first, or take turns if you're playing multiple games in a row. Players will next have to determine which kingdom they're playing as, take the appropriate deck for that kingdom, and then determine which units, abilities, and items will be used in their army. The centerpiece of your kingdom's army is your hero, the most powerful unit on your side of the field that you will gain by default. While heroes may have stats just like the other units, they also have access to powerful abilities and items the other units do not. We'll get back to all that in a moment. Every other card has a gold cost in the top corner, and a standard game has a gold limit of 80 gold for each army. In advanced games, players can draft their armies out of their larger kingdom deck that has 160 gold worth of cards by going back and forth choosing their cards one by one with their opponent. You can also just do what's called a blitz game, determining a starting gold limit, picking your cards all at once, setting them up, and going right into playing. Finally, you can also just use pre-made blitz armies provided by the rulebook, which is what we've done here. Army units are placed in hexes in the first 2 rows on the long sides of the map, clearly delineated by a colored border. If any of your units have starting shields or mana totals, place dice on them now, turned to the max starting amount that they have. Every unit card has a name and gold cost at the top, and a power value represented by a sword, movement value represented by arrows, and a health value represented by a heart at the bottom. Units may have a range value at the bottom as well, represented by a bow, meaning that they and they alone can attack from more than one hex away. If they don't have this, then they may only attack in melee range. The text box of each unit will list any special abilities they may have, some of which may be passive, and some of which may need to be actively used as one of your turns, and or fueled using mana as mentioned before. Abilities can influence movement, attacking, defense, etc. The back of each card will offer further explanation of abilities as a quick reference. Any ability cards or items you selected are placed off the map in your play area. These cards are tied directly to your chosen hero. Items usually give a flat stat boost or modify how your hero's attack or defense work. Abilities either passively modify the hero or give them a special spell or technique they may choose to use, oftentimes by spending mana. When both players have placed their units, the game begins with the designated first player. The game takes place over 7 rounds, and each round consists of players taking turns performing a single action with a single unit until each player is out of units to use. Then play moves on to the next round. On your turn, you may have one of your units perform one of 3 different actions: move, attack, or use an ability. When finished with actions, in almost all cases, you will turn the used unit card sideways to indicate it has taken its action for the round and cannot act again until a new round, barring any special abilities, which is called being exhausted. A card can move up to as many hexes as its movement value, but by default cannot move through enemy or ally occupied hexes. Special abilities like allied pathing allow some units to move through, but not stop on, allies, and abilities like flying will let units move through enemies as well. Attacking simply means dealing your unit's power to a targetable enemy unit, automatically lowering their health unless they can mitigate the damage with shields or special abilities. Units with ranged attack designation can hit from the indicated number of hexes away with no repercussions. If damage gets through to harm the defender, and they don't die outright, take a red damage die to keep track of what health they have left. A unit that can only attack in melee range has special considerations to take into account. First, they must be in an adjacent hex, and they must have at least 1 unit of movement available to them, because they are attempting to move into the defender's hex. In fact, if they succeed in killing the defender, they move into the now empty space from where they were. If they fail to do enough damage to kill the defender, not only are they pushed back into their original space, the defender gets to retaliate for free, dealing their damage equal to its power to the attacker. Lastly, some units have activated abilities that require using an action, and oftentimes will require spending mana. Players who do not wish to take actions with some units may have them skip instead, exhausting them for the round, but without actually using up an action. When both players have exhausted every unit, play proceeds to the next round, with every unit being turned back the right way, ready to be used again. But if that was the end of the 7th round, you must check to see if the first player has a unit occupying the center hex. If so, they immediately win the game. If not, the second player immediately wins instead. And that is Legacy's Allure. Well, I think before we go any further, what we should discuss here is what is unique about this game. I think that when people first glance at the map with the cards laid out in it, and you see that there's like these fantasy heroes and monsters and troops who are moving back and forth, it can remind you of some other games that have more like random chaotic aspects to it and that are more card games than what Legacy's Allure is, which is a war game. And the very important distinction among many that is here is that this is not a random chaotic game. The designer of the game actually compares this more to chess in the sense because there's no randomness here. Other than the initial roll to determine who goes first and who is designated as the second player. And even that depends on you and your opponent. You may not make it random. You just may decide to take turns or use whichever method you want. After that, this is purely a game of strategy and skill. You are trying to outmaneuver your opponent using the allotment of tools you have out available to you, which your opponent can see at all times. At any given time, you and your opponent can see each other's abilities, the cards and units you have out there, and if you choose to make it, even more intense, you can, in an advanced game, when you both are familiar with all the rules and are comfortable with it, you can even do drafting and really have, again, this can be, you don't have control over what your opponent chooses to put into their kingdom deck and have the option of choosing, but you can see card by card what they're putting out there and then react to that. So you have this sense of control throughout the entire time, which is very much like, any other war game that you can think of. And really, another important distinction here is the variety of what you have here. You have the variety of the heroes that you can use, the units that they choose to field along with them, and those ability cards and item cards that directly influence that hero. And even just with the starting decks that you see here, you have a multitude of different options for that, not just the ones that I showed in the preview section there. All of them can affect the hero in a different way, and because they're the centerpiece of your army, can affect how you move your other units around them, choosing to either play defensively to protect that unit or use offensively. Because remember, while the hero is your most important unit on the field, in a sense, they're not how you're going to necessarily win the game. It's very likely that they might be the unit that, if you're the first player, you're trying to take that center hex. It might be the unit that you use for that, or it might be the unit you use to kill whatever unit, if you're the second player, is trying to take over that center hex. But they are just another unit, and you need to keep that in mind. It's how you use everything that you have in your out on the map that's going to make all of the difference there. Another important thing to note is that this is an expandable war game, in the sense that it's not going to be a random chaotic thing like a collectible card game or anything like that, or anything where you're going to be constantly having to buy card decks like every month. Instead, there's going to be an entire arena league for this game, and so there'll be regular updates every year and expandable content that you can and even if you don't want to mess with that at all and just want to have this for your own private use with your friends, you can just buy expansions to the game as you see fit or not. So it's not something that you constantly have to be chasing. You can play the game how you want to play the game and purchase things for the game as you want to purchase things for the game. So it really puts it in that together with the war game aspect of it and the distinct strategical way that the game is played, really puts it in a category of its own compared to other games which, like I said, may look at first glance like they're similar, but really aren't that similar. And despite all that I said, which makes it sound like sort of a heavier game, it's actually not. It can be, but because of how flexible you can be with making up your kingdom deck and how many units you even choose to use, and the fact that you can just play a low gold game and have not that many units, that makes it way more accessible to people who maybe aren't used to this type of strategic war game and who maybe want something a little more entry level. But it doesn't have to stay entry level. It can expand into a grander, heavier, more strategic game. So if any of that sounds like it appeals to you, I didn't even really touch on the fact that the game has high quality artwork, and the final version will have high quality components and a whole ton of lore surrounding the characters and the world as well, which I just didn't have time to go into here. But if any of that sounds like it appeals to you, you don't have to take my word for it. You can go to the official Kickstarter project page and find out even more information. Once again, I will have those links in the top corner of your screen, as well as down in the description section underneath this video. Go there and hopefully consider backing the project. That is Legacy's Allure from Plutonian Shore Games. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, for supporting our sponsors. Take care.